What were the impressions of Brad Logan at SEC Media Days? We ask him next.
You are Locked On Ole Miss, your daily podcast on the Ole Miss Rebels. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome to the Locked On Ole Miss podcast. I'm your host, Steven Willis, and we bring in Brad Logan, who was in Atlanta for Ole Miss's day for SEC Media Days. He's the host of the Red and Blue Crop podcast, and he is going to talk all about that. Thanks for making Locked On Ole Miss your first listen, and please give us a like, subscribe, and comment on your way out. Costs nothing, does the show a lot of benefit. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Right now, new customers can get $150 in bonus bets when your first $5 bet wins. Should be pretty interesting stuff. So, Brad, really interesting stuff coming up with Ole Miss. I thought Ole Miss performed exceedingly well at SEC Media Days. I mean, it was a masterclass. Lane Kiffin was great. The players were fantastic. They did everything that they could do. But the interesting thing, the talking heads, the SEC network guys, they would get on there and they would talk about Georgia and LSU and Texas and all of that. And even at the bottom of the screen, there would be the percentages get into the playoff. And it would be Ole Miss at 1-3 essentially, but they had never mentioned it. Ole Miss was an afterthought to them. What was it like on the ground in Atlanta?
Yeah, that's why I asked you in pre-production what you thought about the broadcast. I mean, we saw people obviously set up at the different stages, but I mean, we couldn't hear what they were saying. Everyone I talked to, which was other journalists and other television personalities, was I think the over/under it's 8.5, and I talked to a lot of people that were taking the over because you look at 8.5, that's 4 losses. And if Chalk plays, and Chalk didn't play last year because Ole Miss lost 2 games they were favored in, if Chalk holds this year, then Ole Miss should go 10-2 with losses to Georgia, and I think they'll probably be an underdog to LSU or possibly an underdog on the road at Oklahoma. I've said all along, I think that Ole Miss is swing game to be a good team versus a great team happens in Norman, Oklahoma. It's following the trip out to Athens, Georgia, and I don't think Ole Miss has to win that game, but I think if they can beat Oklahoma the following week, I think that will prove to be really good at Ole Miss's favor. And look, I've said all along that I really like Ole Miss's schedule this year. Not getting Alabama, Auburn, Tennessee, Texas A&M, and I think the schedule works out really well for Ole Miss this year. But yeah, I mean, the vibe was very positive from the floor. From Radio Row and from the different interviews that I did and the different people I talked to, everyone was very, very high on Ole Miss.
Yeah, and Lane Kiffin obviously felt very good about his roster. Absolutely. He talked about everything going on. Took shots at Hugh Freeze and Auburn. It was kind of funny. He took a shot at Mississippi State, whether he knew it or not, saying that Ole Miss had a chance at 9 home games, which is saying Davis Wade Stadium in Starkville is essentially going to be a home game for Ole Miss fans. I like the way that Ole Miss came out. And whenever I heard Lane Kiffin and the players talk and all of that, I immediately felt better about this season than before SEC Media Days happened, which is honestly for the fan base. It's the whole point, right?
I think there's a reason that fans should be in a much more positive situation in regards to what they feel about the team following SEC Media Day, because what I've said all along is I believe between Lane Kiffin, between Caden Lee, the wide receiver, and then Austin Simmons, the quarterback, and in some degree TJ Dottery, the linebacker, it was a quiet confidence. That was my best description between Lane Kiffin and the remaining players. They were very, very quietly confident. And I think there's reason to be confident because without getting into minutia in regards to the running back rooms and wide receiver rooms, kind of staying above 10,000 feet, the roster on offense, I think, with the exception of Jackson Dart, is better. I think they're going to be better across the board on offense. Defense, obviously, that's going to be the question mark. And I asked TJ Dottery about all of these players coming in on defense. And we made mention of a couple of players, specifically Jalen Braxton, the transfer out of Arkansas. And I asked TJ, look, a lot of new faces. Suntaran Perkins is someone that I think a lot of Ole Miss fans are excited to see how he takes a step up, whether he's being on the line of scrimmage or not. But you've got Princewill Emmanuel and then Deshaun Womack, the transfer of LSU. So you've got some pieces to fill in, but it's almost impossible to fill in names like Walter Nolan, Jared Ivey, J.J. Pegues, Princely Emmanuel. And so Ole Miss has got a lot of work to do on that defense. But I also tell Ole Miss fans that ask me, the good news, I think, in all of this is you do return a pretty good core, and it starts with T.J. Dottery, who I thought a great question by Sam Hutchins of the Clarion Ledger was, how important is it to wear the green dot? And for folks that don't know, the green dot is the quarterback on the defense that wears the headset or the earpiece and can talk to the defensive coordinator up until I think it was 15 seconds on the play clock. So I think there were some things to kind of build upon, but it's a transfer heavy laden defense. And when you look at Sage Ryan, the transfer to LSU, and then I talked about Braxton, I asked him specifically about the defensive backfield, who's some names some fans can kind of look forward to. And he very quickly said Jalen Braxton is a guy that has looked really good. And he also made mention when I asked about how the defense was meshing together, he smiled and said, it's going well. So I do think those are some positive things to draw from the defense. But offense, I think, I was talking with Brett Norsworthy of Sports 56, and I said, Brett, they're going to score a lot of points. I just don't know about that defense. And he says, I don't know if I could take another year of make it take it. So it could be definitely something, especially early on. You look at Georgia State, and I think that's a great way to start when you're trying to look at some ways to get ready, because you got Kentucky and Arkansas, two teams you should beat coming up in SEC play. The schedule is a little different than last year. I don't know if it's very much more difficult, but it is more difficult in the early stages of the season. But I think you can kind of answer some questions there before the season really cranks up against Tulane and LSU. Football's right around the corner, but that quiet confidence, I did sense that from Ole Miss.
Yeah, the one thing that everybody likes to say is, well, Ole Miss went 9-3 with the most talented roster they've ever had. Is that their ceiling? Is that what's going on? I was like, there's going to be a step back. And I'm like, okay, that's true. The 2025 roster is not going to be as talented as the 2024 roster. But the 2025 roster is more talented than the 2023 roster that won 11 games and beat Penn State. So just because it comes down, last year was a 12-0 roster that went 9-3. The year before was a 10-2 roster that probably went 11-2 or something like that. I think that Ole Miss should be in the discussion for the playoff because I think this team is going to surprise people. There's going to be household names in October that you don't know now, and it's going to be because of what they're doing offensively with Austin Simmons, and it's going to be what they do defensively, especially at the back end of that defense. I think Juanette Williams or Sage Ryan taking a step at the back end of that defense is a major, major key that we will have an eye on over the next couple of months.
We had a chance to visit with Caden Lee, and I didn't know this, but Brett told me that Caden Lee didn't drop a pass last year.
Yeah,
you may have known that. I didn't realize that. And if you'll look specifically last year when Austin Simmons came in against Georgia, who did he throw to? Mm-hmm. And so I asked Caden Lee, I was like, take me back to when Austin Simmons got the call, when Jackson went down, you got the call, or Austin got the call to come into the game. Take me through that process. And he said, I expected him to come into the huddle and start yelling and screaming. And, he didn't. He just looked at us and, called the play. And then, we went after it. If you'll remember, Ole Miss fans remember, the stadium was jammed. Everybody in the country was watching. And here's the thing, too. The ball was wet. I mean,
it was a yucky day. Yeah, it was a yucky day.
Great day. And so he came in and just let him right down the field for the touchdown. We know that. But I also asked Caden, what makes Austin so special? And he kind of smiled and said, before he went out on the field, Caden said he kind of looked at me and says, look, you know what you have to do. And he said, and basically in so many words, throw me the ball. And I think all of that kind of worked out. And I don't think Ole Miss fans and I don't think national media, regional media are making too much out of the fact that there is a small sample size with Austin Simmons. And I get that, especially for folks that don't cover the program and you haven't seen him in practice and in scrimmage and all that. And I understand it's a small sample size. But that sample size was not against, and no disrespect to Georgia State and Tulane and Wake Forest, it was against one of the best teams in the country, and at that time, the number one team in the country. And
a team that Arch Manning struggled against when he got thrust in the game.
And it was such a good performance that people, and I'll say it, I said it to myself. I don't know that I said it out loud. Do you pull him? And I think you have to, because there were bigger fish to fry at the end of the year. You had to put Jackson back in the game because you could have killed his confidence, and you do not want a quarterback battle midway through the year. So I get that. But it did enter my mind at that point when he looked so good. If Jackson is too hurt to go back in, do you risk it? And not only that, he looked really good against Georgia during that one drive. So I said all that to say this. It is a small sample size, but it is an incredibly important sample size. And, you know, there's been numbers of media, J.D. Piquel with On 3. Ben Garrett wrote a story from it's Rebel Grove now, which used to be the Ole Miss Spirit, which is still just blows my mind. But Ben wrote a good story about what they're saying about Austin Simmons, and he talked about Piquel, he talked about Brian Haydad for Super Talk, he talked about I think Peter Burns, SEC Network, and all of it. And I think it was Peter Burns that talked about how impressed he's been with Austin Simmons, not only on the field but off the field in interview situations. I mean, he was cool as he could be. You know, I think someone asked Austin in one of the breakout rooms, what about the offensive line? He kind of smiled. He said, I'm excited. They're the ones that are going to protect me. And going back to Monday, he said, I'm taking them all to the grill house on Tuesday. And I kind of shook my head, and he said, yeah, you know about it. I said, yeah, I do. And he says that they're worth it. And so the camaraderie is there. You talk about the offensive line, and that's definitely been an area I think that could be an area of concern for Coach Garrison. You got redshirt sophomore Delano Townsend, I think, is very highly decorated, the sophomore transfer. But Diego Pounds has to continue to improve. Right tackle, Jaden Williams, he's a senior now. He needs to continue to step up. Patrick Kutas is someone that it could be sour grapes, Stephen, but the Arkansas people do not appear to be incredibly upset that he left. I think there's some sour grapes.
That is sour grapes. Yeah, he's really good.
Yeah, and then Bryson Sanders. That is a name to where he's been in the program. He needs to step up and be the center. Then you start talking about names like someone like a John Wayne Oliver is someone that I think could be good down the road. Terez Davis, a sophomore transfer. So just a couple of names. We'll see if they get any snaps. But the offensive line is definitely an area that I think Ole Miss should have some concern about. Tight end room, running back room, wide receiver room, quarterback room, not the case. Loaded this year, and it should be fun to watch.
All right, when we come back, we will talk to Brad some more about SEC Media Days and get ready for the season that is coming up. It's going to be quite awesome. But first, I do want to let you know summer sports are in full swing, and whether you're all about baseball under the lights, golf on the green, or high-stakes soccer action, FanDuel is the best way to make every game even more exciting. You're already following the action. Why not make it a little bit more thrilling? With FanDuel, you can get in on the game while your friends are getting sunburned at the beach. Who wouldn't want to not get sunburned? I've been using FanDuel to track my favorite matchups, and Ole Miss opening versus Georgia State is front and center in my mind right now, and the Rebels being a 37-point favorite gets me ready for football. So if you're new to FanDuel, new customers can bet just $5 and get $150 in bonus bets if that first bet wins. Open the FanDuel app today or visit FanDuel.com to get started. All right, we go back to Brad Logan. And the interesting thing to me at Media Days, the questions that was being asked and the unknown, it was the TJ Dottery stuff. You talked about him being the green dot on defense. And I go back to Pete Golding having a fireside chat with Chris Beard a little bit earlier in the summer. And he mentioned specifically he's not worried about his defense. He doesn't think the drop-off from last year to this year on the front seven is going to be that much. And he's not worried about the secondary. And honestly, after hearing that, I felt a whole lot better.
I just don't know how you can say the front seven is not going to be a drop off after as many players as Ole Miss put in the
Well, not much of a drop off.
Unless he feels really good about Will Eccles, Cam Franklin. If you know about Xavier Harris, Jamarius Brown, with Mommy Ellen's younger brother, I get it, Deshaun Womack. Okay, let's just say that he's true, and it's not a huge drop off. That's going to be a big step for Ole Miss moving forward. So, yeah, I mean, I'm not going to sit here and say that he's wrong. I mean, P. Golding has been, I don't know, Steven, you look back over the defensive coordinators over the last 25 years, he'd be up there. I mean, he's done a really good job. And so I think Ole Miss fans are trusting him. I think there's reason to trust him. And so I think what he said, I think that's what Ole Miss fans need to do. One thing I wanted to point out, I was in the electronic media room, and Lane Kiffin was there. And I'll give Lane credit. He could have answered this. He could have filibustered for 10 minutes, but he was straight up. I said, Coach, now that the season is over, you've been able to evaluate, or last season's over, you've been able to evaluate specifically the losses. What would you say that you've learned from those losses, and what would you say that you can do moving forward up into next year and some things that you've learned? And he could have chewed me up and spit me out, but he was very honest. He said, well, first thing we have to do is run the ball effectively in important situations. And I think that's exactly what happened. I mean, if Ole Miss runs the ball in important situations against Kentucky, LSU, and, of course, Florida, they're undefeated. I don't think anybody is arguing that. But they didn't, and they lost 3 games. He also mentioned, he says, we were 0-3 last year in one-score games. We were 10-0 in games and where we scored double digits or whatever. He said the key component is last year, the year before last, we were 4-0. It was at 4-0, Steven?
Yeah,
4-0 in one-score games. Whatever it was, they were undefeated in one-score games. So he said that's just the difference in the 2 seasons. But to answer your question, we have to be able to run the ball in important situations when it matters. And I just go back, not necessarily LSU just kind of fell apart. You kind of felt the tidal wave coming, down on the field. It was pandemonium. That wasn't the case with Kentucky and Florida. Florida kind of controlled that game because Ole Miss could not solidify the run. Jackson Dart kind of, fell apart there at the end.
Well, Ole Miss also did not take points at LSU and Florida on the road that kind of allowed them to get into the game.
They did. If you remember early, Ole Miss went for it on 4th and 1. Around the goal line. I think JJ tried to bounce it for whatever reason. He decided he wanted to be a running back the latter part of the year. But I think he tried to bounce it, and they stopped him. That was a huge 4th and 1. I think everybody was like, wow, that may come back. LSU, Trey Harris dropped a wide-open touchdown. With the Florida game, the Kentucky game, if you have a solidified running game, a hard-nosed running back, and you can run the ball when you have to, those 2 games are definitely going in Ole Miss's favor. I can't say the same for LSU because it just fell apart. I mean, I watched it fall apart, and it just fell apart. So I think if Ole Miss – let's talk real quick about that running game. Logan Diggs, we saw him in the Gator Bowl. He came out without a brace. I don't know if he ran the ball with or without the brace, but I do know he entered the game again with the brace on. So I don't know if that was precautionary. He just wanted to,
an ACL is an 18-month injury, and it's going to be 18 months done at the start of fall camp. So he should be good to go.
So now, but the good news is the D word is back in the wide receiver room, which is depth. Kai Mills-Knight, a freshman, I do think we'll see him. But Kawan Lacey was a great pickup, transfer out of Missouri. If you remember, he committed to Ole Miss at the last minute, decided to sign with Missouri, and now he's back in Oxford. Interesting running back, Damian Taylor, that senior transfer. I'm wondering if he'll get any significant carries this year. So definitely something to watch.
Curious about that. We all thought Rashad Amos would get a lot of carries. There's a lot of similarities there, and he didn't get that much. So,
but Dominic Thomas is still on the roster too, so he's another body out there. But they didn't use him much last year. I think if you can get everybody we've talked to, we've asked the question, how is Logan Diggs look, including players, and they're all, it looks good. He's 100% or whatever. So I'll be interested to see, because between he and Lacey and then what they might do with Damian Taylor, Shakai Mills-Knight, the good news for Ole Miss fans, there's depth at the running back room.
Yeah, I think, just thinking, I don't know anything about it, but I think they would like to get back to what they did in 2020 and 2021 with when they had Jaron Ely, Snoop Connor, and Henry Parrish in the backfield. I think a situation to where it's Logan Diggs, Keywan Lacey, and Shakai Mills-Knight, that just is a natural thing. If Shakai Mills-Knight, for whatever reason, doesn't pick it up, it'll be Damian Taylor. But I do think that they probably are looking at a 3-man rotation.
Yeah, and the good thing about when they had Ely and Connor is that they were able to alternate like the power situation. Who was that third running back?
Henry Parrish was third.
Yeah.
He was a true freshman at that point.
When was Zach Evans?
Zach Evans 2022. He was there with Quinshawn.
That's right. All right, so the year before, the good news with Parrish, he offered something a little different. The power back was Snoop Connor, who was, I think, the older we get, the more we look back on that season, the more I think he was underappreciated.
All right, so when we come back, one more segment in the show, we are going to talk about the Locked On predictions, show them to Brad, and see what he thinks about that. And I don't know, we'll just have a little bit of fun with SEC Media Days and the Ole Miss season coming up. So stick around for that. Brad, I did my W's and L's a little bit earlier in the week or 2 weeks ago, and this is what I have right now. This is the football schedule. I've got Ole Miss at 10-2. They're going to struggle on the road. They're going to lose both of their tough road games at Georgia and at Oklahoma. They're going to win all 8 home games, and they're going to beat at Kentucky and at Mississippi State. What say you?
9-3 is what I predicted, and definitely the loss at Georgia. And then I think a combination of LSU, South Carolina, Florida, and Oklahoma to get those other 2 losses. I think Ole Miss will play well and beat Kentucky handily, and then set up a 4-0 with LSU coming to town on September 27th. The game I think people can't sleep on is John Sumrall at Tennessee, at Tulane. Now, I do not think that Tulane's going to beat Ole Miss, but I do think that's a game you can't sleep on the Green Wave. I think they're going to come in very, very well prepared. But I do think, kind of going back to what we were talking about, that game at Georgia and Oklahoma, Ole Miss needs to try to not lose 2 in a row there. But I do think if they can somehow beat Oklahoma, 10-2 is absolutely a possibility. But I just can't see them winning all the games with Florida, LSU, Georgia, Oklahoma, South Carolina. I think it's going to be tough. So definitely some losses out there. But I think 9-3 with a combination of those games is how Ole Miss gets there.
Yeah, I think South Carolina is not going to be as good as everybody is saying they're going to be.
Well, Sellers is getting blown up by everybody.
Yeah. I saw what I saw in the Citrus Bowl, and that was Illinois doing the same thing that Ole Miss did to him. And if you take his legs away, he's kind of an ineffective passer. I don't know how healthy DJ Lagway is. Nobody's talking about it. It's been on the news down here in Central Florida that he missed a window to have a surgery on his shoulder. He's a little bit Bo Wallace-like. If that happens, he's not at full strength. I mean, that's probably good for whoever's playing Florida, especially with Ole Miss playing them later in the year. I think Georgia's the toughest game. LSU is the second toughest, and the third toughest is Oklahoma on Ole Miss' schedule.
I have a hard time arguing with that.
Yeah, it's one of those games. Listen, I think Oklahoma's going to be pretty good, but Chris Doering naming John Mateer a future Heisman winner and comparing him to Baker Mayfield. Let's pump the brakes on that a little bit.
Well, I was in the hotel whenever I saw that segment, and who was opposite? Was it Peter Burns who was opposite of Doering? I think it was like SEC This Morning or whatever. I give Peter credit. He pushed back a lot on that. He says, wow, you were going all in on Oklahoma. Yeah, I don't know about all that. I think if there's a Heisman favorite in the SEC, I mean, I know Ole Miss fans don't want to hear this, but the schedule's setting up for Arch Manning to kind of lead the charge there. And we'll see what happens. I don't know how good Arch is. He's getting a lot of pomp and circumstance. We'll see soon enough. But look at that opening window of college football games. LSU and Clemson.
Fantastic.
There's another big one.
Auburn and Baylor is a low-key big game.
Huge game for Hugh Freeze.
Yeah.
And there's another big game that day, too. And I forget, someone posted the schedule that day.
Texas and Ohio State.
Yes, that's it. Mm-hmm. That is a huge day for college football. And I mean, it is shooting out with a bang. And that Texas Ohio State, you said Texas Ohio State, right?
Yes.
I mean,
in Ohio State.
Yeah. So that is Arch Manning, baptized in fire. And so you let him go out and Texas beat Ohio State 28-24. Arch have a productive day. It's going to blow up. If
Texas loses that game, it could go the other direction. I've talked all year. Texas is on 8-4 watch this year. They have to go to Georgia, to Florida, and they play Oklahoma. They're definitely on 8-4 watch.
Well, you've seen the schedule. The difficulty in Florida is number one, and everybody's talking about how Texas has such a difficult schedule, and so does Florida, and Mississippi State schedule is difficult. So there are a lot of teams in the conference. Ole Miss not one of those teams, and that's why I think every year, at least the last couple of years, Ole Miss has had a very manageable schedule. May not be the case the next couple of years, so you have to take advantage of that.
Yeah, Ole Miss and Missouri are the two most underrated teams in the entire Southeastern Conference. They are, just because of their schedule. Missouri plays nobody. They need to send a Christmas card to whoever does the SEC schedules.
I don't think they leave Columbia, Missouri until like October the 20th.
Yeah, it's absolutely nuts. So, I mean, if you look at where games are being played and if a team has a quarterback, if Ole Miss and Missouri were both returning quarterbacks, it would be a no-brainer that they would probably be in the top 2 or 3 in the conference. So, anyway, Brad, what have you got going on the Red and Blue Crew podcast, all of that stuff?
Well, obviously getting all the stuff together from SEC Media Days. We've had a lot of great feedback from our content on Twitter/X, Facebook, and the other social channels of everything we did at the at SEC Media Days this year. So getting ready for fall camp. We'll have Media Day for Ole Miss in a couple of weeks. But, David Johnson and I rocking along on the Red and Blue Crew podcast, continuing to grow. We've added the video element, and things have really done well. And so we could not thank our friends over at the Talk of Champions podcast network. They also host that for us. And, of course, our friends over at the On 3. And, Rebel Grove On 3, not the Ole Miss Spirit anymore.
Yeah, you know what? When I think of Ole Miss coverage online and all that, the first thing I think of is the Ole Miss Spirit. So it just kind of baffles the mind that brand just got thrown away. It's so weird.
Just a new day in coverage for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. Anyway, thank you, Brad, and we will talk to you later, buddy.
Always a pleasure.
All right, so thank you for making the Locked On Ole Miss podcast your go-to place for Ole Miss sports. We pride ourselves on offering the most comprehensive perspectives, which is why we are the front door of Ole Miss. If you don't believe us, check out Google and search Ole Miss podcast and see how much the Locked On Ole Miss podcast comes up. Don't forget to subscribe, like, and comment on this show. Your support means the world to us. For your second listen, check out the Portal podcast. Brian Smith has the latest rumors, portal entries, and signings. Be the most informed fan on the rapid changes on college football's landscape. That is the Portal podcast. It's available wherever you get your podcasts. Hotty toddy, everyone. And remember, analytics is just the old English word that means bad football. We'll talk to you tomorrow.